Okay, good morning. I'm going to try this a little bit different. I don't want to write it. I want to talk about it. We're in the last month, and I know all of us are in some ways we can't believe that we've been doing this for a month, and now we have one more month to go. And so there's three things that I want us to really focus on as we wrap up the year. And one of them comes from this book, When, by Daniel Pink. It was the book that I offered at the beginning of the year. And he says this, he's talking about the endings of things. And so he's speaking specifically to the ending of life. But what he says, I think it applies very acutely to our situation here. He says, there is what's called an end of life bias, or as the researchers call it, and it suggests that we believe people's true selves are revealed at the end. People's true selves are revealed at the end. And we see this played out quite a bit in like movies or books or whatever, that they can be a fairly wishy-washy person or even a bad person for the bulk of the movie or the bulk of the story. But at the end, whatever they decide to do, we accept that as that's who they're going to be for the rest of after the movie. And so we accept them as that. And we see this in life too. And he talks specifically about life, where you can have somebody who by and large is maybe a bad person or a selfish person. And they live 60, 70 years being a fairly bad person. But if in the last 5 to 10 years they do good things, they kind of have this reawakening, we accept them and we kind of forgive the past 70 years, even though the weights are radically imbalanced. And vice versa. If they're a good person but then end terribly, we kind of associate that as their person. And so end of the year bias. And so how that applies to us is, and applies to me specifically, is how we end this year, how we spend the next 4 weeks. We have been killing it. We have been doing great things. How we end, though, is how our students and our community and even ourselves will remember this whole time period. And so although we are tired, and although we are ready and anxious for the summer, and although we might be beginning to hear more grumblings and complainings from students and from parents, now is the time that we really push in. For myself, I had a meeting with Mrs. Bile yesterday. I'm going to start over communicating like crazy with the seniors and with the students, because I want to finish strong. I want to end this year well, in the same way that we're saying to our students to just send it. That also applies to us. So as we head into this final push, I want to encourage you and to remind you that how we finish and how we wrap up the year, that's how we will be remembered this year and this time for the years to come. So with each other, with our students, with our parents, we are going to extend grace, we're going to extend kindness and patience. That does not mean that we are going to sacrifice our integrity of education and our integrity of teaching, but we are going to amp it up just ever so slightly for the last push, so that when this is all over, how we're remembered is how we spend the next 4 months or 4 weeks. The other thing that I want to focus on comes from this book called Focus by Daniel Goleman. And this one is really interesting because, just to be a little bit transparent, I get, and recently I've been getting more complaints, and I'll call them complaints from parents and students about the workload of some of our teachers. And so some of you are mentioned specifically and others are not. And as I kind of assess all of our teachers, I don't think any one teacher is having more of a rigorous expectation or higher expectations, or is less gracious than any other. We're all roughly the same, I think, or I believe. But what it does come down to, and what he talks about in here, is how we talk, or the bedside manner. And so I'm just going to read a couple things. He's talking about surgeons, American surgeons, and this is what he says about American surgeons. The journal Surgery reports a study where a surgeon's tone of voice was evaluated based on 10-second snippets recorded during sessions with their patients. Half the surgeons whose voices were rated had been sued for malpractice, half had not. The voices of those who had been sued were far more often rated as domineering and uncaring. And later on, he says this. Empathy, the ability to connect with patients in a deep sense, to listen, to pay attention, lies at the heart of the medical practice. Physicians who are sued for malpractice in the United States generally make no more medical errors than those who are not sued. The main difference, research shows, often comes down to the tenor of the doctor-patient relationship. Those who are sued, it turns out, have fewer signs of emotional rapport. They have shorter visits with patients, fail to ask about the patient's concerns or make sure their questions are answered, and have more emotional distance. There's little or no laughter, for example. And so really what he's trying to say is, and that line of the doctors who are being sued, they make no more mistakes. There's no more mistakes. They just make the mistake of not being kind. They make the mistake of not having bedside manner. And so even in that, what I want to just encourage us is how we speak to our students. It doesn't mean that we have to be more lenient. It doesn't mean we have to be more gracious. It doesn't mean we have to extend the deadline for a second or third time. We can still be strict. We can still maintain our integrity. We can still expect great things from our students. The students will respond negatively to those who they feel aren't empathetic to their plight, who aren't sympathizing with where they are, who aren't even just listening. So I was chatting with one of you the other day, and what this teacher who had expressed was, I don't really ever budge my expectation. I don't budge my deadline, but I do just listen for about 5 to 7 minutes about where they're at, and I empathize with them, and then I say at the very end, okay, I hear you and I see you, this still has to be done. And so the second thing that I want to encourage you as we wrap up this year and as we try and end well is that to be radically conscious of how we speak to our students and how we speak to our teachers, fellow teachers, and to our parents. Sometimes not speaking at all is what's best, just listening to them. But how our bedside manner is going to drastically impact the way in which they perceive our practice. Okay, so with all of that, the third thing that I want to keep us all mindful of, we are used to, at the end of every year, the students freaking out and coming to us and saying, can I do some extra credit? Can I do this? Can I do that? I need to bring my grade up, okay? We're used to that. That's going to be amplified 10 times this year, at the end of this year. And some of them are going to be the students who have taken a 5-6 week hiatus. So here's our message, or here's what I want us to allow. Of course, if a student needs help, we're going to help them. If they want one-on-one help, tutoring, of course, that's an option. What it does not mean, though, is that because a student has decided to go AWOL, or a student has decided to do relatively nothing, that you therefore now have to extend an insane amount of time and an insane amount of effort to help them pass their classes. If a student who has done nothing comes in and asks for help, you can help them on what they're working on, what you're working on in class. However, they don't need help on things that were done 4 or 5 weeks ago. That's already passed. Your deadline has already been set. What else was I going to say? If students want one-on-one care, of course we will provide that. We've already been providing that. That doesn't mean that you don't do your Zoom meetings, because they are allotted the time during your actual class time. So if they need help with English or help with math, you have that time during your English class and your math class. Now, most of you have already sucked up that time doing Zoom meetings or whatever, and that's great. These students can request help. You don't have to bend over and do everything for them. You don't. Of course, we're going to provide grace. Of course, we're going to provide help. But we are not going to take on a heap of responsibility for students who have done nothing up until this point. So I'm going to just kind of make that blanket statement, and I'm going to write a letter today to students and to parents talking about academic integrity, talking about why we're not going to continue to draw back on our expectations because we have academic integrity, and also talk about for you that you've had deadlines and you've had expectations, and if a student has chosen not to follow that, we can keep them accountable to that and say, we're not going to move our deadlines, we're not going to move our expectations. Okay, so those are our 3 things that I really want us to focus on. One is how we end well. This is how we're going to be remembered, by how we end. Number 2 is our bedside manner. just listening and being extra patient and extra kind doesn't mean we have to go back on what we've already said, but it does mean we're just going to be a little bit more gracious than we have been already. And then number 3, of course, we're going to help kids, but that doesn't mean that you need to share the burden or shoulder the entire burden of their lack of involvement for the past 5 weeks. Okay? Happy Friday. Do great things. Hopefully this was easier than reading. If not, let me know and I'll go back to writing. Have a great day. Bye.